Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the complexities of personality disorders, or PDs. We've got a whole stack of clinical sources here, and we're trying to unpack what these deep-seated patterns actually mean.
Yeah, and it's important right off the bat to distinguish between personality, which we all have,
Yeah.
those characteristic ways we think and behave, usually quite flexible, and a disorder.
Right.
A disorder is when those patterns become really rigid,
Yeah.
pervasive, maladaptive even.
Right.
They cause significant distress or real problems in functioning, especially in relationships.
And the scale is huge. Sources point to maybe 10% of the global population being affected. But the real challenge, the sort of paradox we kept seeing, is treatment. It's incredibly tough.
It is tough. And a big reason why is because the individual often doesn't see their personality as the issue. It feels, well, it just feels like them.
They're just being themselves, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what we call egocentrism. The traits feel natural, like they fit. It's not like anxiety or depression, which usually feel ego-dystonic, foreign, something you want to get rid of. With PDs, it's more like, this is just how I am. It's everyone else or the world that's the problem.
Which makes diagnosis and especially getting someone into effective management so incredibly complicated. And they rarely show up alone, do they? There's often comorbidity.
Oh, absolutely. Huge overlap with things like substance abuse, anxiety disorders, mood disorders. And when they co-occur, you often see this amplification of, well, emotional dysregulation.
Okay, let's break that down. What does emotional dysregulation actually look like?
It fundamentally means difficulty managing emotional responses. So you're looking at mood swings that are really intense, they can change very quickly, and often seem way out of proportion to whatever triggered them. This profound instability is a real hallmark for many PDs.
And you mentioned something crucial before we started recording. This isn't about manipulation.
Clinically, it's vital to remember that. The instability is a symptom of a deficit, a poor capacity for self-regulation. It's not typically conscious manipulation, though the impact can feel that way to others.
Got it. Okay, so if these patterns are so rigid, so enduring, where do they come from? Let's talk etiology, brain, environment. What's the story?
It's definitely a mix, a complex interplay. There's a clear biological or neurobiological vulnerability involved.
So what are we seeing in the brain?
Research consistently points to differences in brain structure and function, particularly in the systems governing emotion and impulse control, like the limbic system, for emotional processing, and the prefrontal cortex, which handles executive functions, planning, decision-making.
So if we were to, say, look at a brain scan, someone struggling with impulsivity, intense emotions, what would stand out?
Well, a common finding is an overactive amygdala. That's the brain's sort of threat detector, is firing off warning signals constantly.
Okay.
And often, this is paired with underacting frontal lobes. So you have this rapid, intense emotional surge. But the brakes, the part of the brain that should manage that response, aren't working effectively.
Like hitting the gas pedal really hard with weak brakes?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, we see dysregulation in key neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, which definitely adds to issues with mood stability and impulsivity.
So there's this biological sensitivity right from the start. But the genetics research suggests that's only about half the picture, right? The other half is environment.
That's right. Environment plays a massive role.
Yeah.
And specifically, early experiences.
Trauma comes up again and again in the sources.
Absolutely. Childhood neglect, different forms of abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, or just chronic stress and instability. These are strongly established risk factors for developing PDs.
And this seems particularly stark when we look at borderline personality disorder, BPD.
Oh, hugely. For BPD, the link to developmental trauma is monumental. Sources cite figures like 70, even up to 90% of individuals diagnosed with BPD reporting significant childhood trauma or growing up in really unstable, invalidating environments.
Wow, 70 to 90%.
Yeah. The connection is so strong that some experts actually conceptualize BPD as being akin to complex PTSD. There's a real debate there, but it highlights the impact of trauma.
That really underscores the integrated model, doesn't it? It's not nature or nurture, it's the collision.
Precisely. It's often framed by the biosocial model.
Yeah.
You have this innate biological vulnerability, maybe higher emotional sensitivity, and then you place that individual in an environment that doesn't validate their feelings or worse, punishes them.
So the environment fails them, basically.
In a crucial way, yes. It doesn't teach them healthy ways to cope with those intense emotions, leading to those maladaptive patterns down the line.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at how these are organized. There are 10 specific PDs in the DSM-5, but they're grouped into 3 clusters, right, based on shared traits.
That's correct. Clusters A, B, and C. It helps to group them descriptively, though there's definitely overlap between disorders and even clusters sometimes.
Let's start with cluster A. These are often described as the odd and eccentric types. What's the common thread there?
The core theme in Cluster A is really social withdrawal and detachment, often combined with distorted thinking or suspiciousness. These individuals tend to struggle with forming close relationships and often prefer being alone.
Okay, so this includes paranoid personality disorder, the pervasive distrust.
Yes, suspicion of others' motives.
Then schizoid PD, more about detachment, limited emotional expression, really preferring solitude.
Exactly. And schizotypal PD, which involves more odd beliefs, maybe eccentric behavior, even magical thinking sometimes. It's a spectrum, but the common element is that social distance.
Isolated either by fear or by choice, it sounds like.
That's a fair summary. Now, jumping over to cluster C, these are the anxious and fearful types, sometimes called the cautious cluster.
So, a very different feel from cluster A. If A is about detachment, what's driving cluster C? What are they trying to manage with all that anxiety?
The core mechanism here is primarily anxiety avoidance. They're dealing with intense fears, fear of failure, rejection, criticism, chaos, and they cope through things like extreme rigidity, needing order, or sometimes by becoming overly reliant on others.
Constantly managing perceived threats.
Yes, hypersensitive to negative evaluation or potential mistakes.
And the specific disorders here are avoidant PD, that social inhibition, fear of criticism.
Right, avoiding situations where they might be judged negatively.
Dependent PD, relying heavily on others, fearing separation.
Yes, an excessive need to be taken care of.
And obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. We need to pause here because this causes so much confusion.
Absolutely critical distinction. OCPD is characterized by this intense preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, control. Rules, lists, details. Inflexibility is key.
And crucially, for everyone listening, this is not the same as OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Not at all. Yeah. And this goes back to that egosyntonic idea. With OCPD, the personality disorder, the need for order, the rigidity, the control, it feels right to the person. It feels like a good, necessary part of who they are.
It's part of their identity.
Exactly. Whereas OCD, the anxiety disorder, involves intrusive, distressing thoughts, obsessions, and repetitive behaviors, compulsions that the person usually recognizes as irrational and doesn't want. It's ego-dystonic. They suffer from it and wish it would go away. That difference is huge clinically.
That clarity is so important. Okay, that brings us to the middle cluster, cluster B, the dramatic, emotional, and erratic group. If A is detached and C is anxious avoidant, what defines B?
Chaos is a good word. Instability. Problems with impulse control, dramatic emotional expression, significant interpersonal difficulties.
Yeah.
This cluster really responds to life's demands in erratic, often chaotic ways.
Let's start with probably the most well-known, or at least most discussed, borderline personality disorder, BPD.
Right. BPD is really characterized by profound instability across the board, relationships, self-image, mood, behavior. It's the most commonly diagnosed PD in many settings, and historically diagnosed much more often in females, though that gap might be narrowing.
And the symptoms sound incredibly painful. Frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, real or imagined.
Intense fear of abandonment, yeah.
Really unstable, intense relationships, rapid mood swings, and this feeling of chronic emptiness.
That chronic emptiness is a core feature. It's incredibly painful and often drives impulsive behaviors, including the high risk we see for suicidal thinking and self-harming actions.
And when we talk about how they perceive the world, especially relationships, there's a key defense mechanism involved, isn't there? Splitting.
Yes, splitting is considered a primary defense mechanism in BPD. It's basically an inability to see nuance, to integrate good and bad qualities in oneself or others.
So someone is either perfect, idealized,
Total idealized, put on a pedestal.
or they're suddenly all bad, completely devalued.
Exactly. That switch can happen very quickly. It prevents stable, realistic views of people and fuels that relationship chaos.
That black and white thinking must be so destructive. Okay, shifting from that kind of chaos, which seems rooted in emotional pain, to a different kind, antisocial personality disorder, APD.
APD is quite different. It's defined more by antagonistic behaviors, deceitfulness, manipulation for personal gain or pleasure, a disregard for others' rights.
And a pattern of violating laws and social norms?
Yes, often starting in childhood or adolescence.
Yeah.
It's diagnosed more often in males and has high rates in forensic or correctional settings. The focus is often on personal power or immediate gratification, often without concern for the consequences for others.
What's the core pathological trait here, that defining feature?
It really comes down to a profound lack of remorse and empathy. Clinically, we term this callousness. It's an indifference to or disregard for the feelings, rights, and suffering of others. That lack of conscience allows for the manipulation and exploitation without internal distress.
Chilling, really. And finally, in cluster B, we have narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, often described as involving grandiosity, needing admiration.
Yes, but that's often seen as a mask, while the outward presentation is one of superiority, entitlement, needing admiration.
There's something else underneath.
Often, yes. Deep-seated insecurity, fragile self-esteem, maybe shame. The grandiosity compensates for that. They have this exaggerated sense of self-importance, expect special treatment, and can be quite exploitative due to a fundamental lack of emotional empathy.
Okay, so we have these three clusters, these distinct patterns rooted in biology and often trauma, and they feel right to the person experiencing them. What does this mean for trying to help? For management, it sounds incredibly challenging.
It absolutely is. These are chronic conditions. Treatment is definitely a marathon, not a sprint. Medications might be used, but usually just as adjuncts to target specific symptoms like severe impulsivity or perhaps co-occurring depression. They don't cure the personality disorder itself.
So therapy is the main approach.
Therapy is the cornerstone, absolutely.
And for BPD, there's one therapy that consistently comes up as the gold standard.
That's dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. Developed specifically for BPD, it has strong evidence behind it for reducing things like self-harm, suicidal behaviors, and hospital stays.
Dialectical behavior therapy, the name itself sounds interesting. What does the dialectical part mean?
It refers to the core tension, the synthesis of opposites. In DBT, that's acceptance and change. The therapy works on fully accepting the patient and validating their experiences, their intense emotional pain,
Okay, validation.
while simultaneously pushing for change by teaching concrete skills to manage emotions and behaviors more effectively. It finds the balance between those two seemingly opposing forces.
And what kind of skills are taught?
There are four main modules: mindfulness, being present in the moment; distress tolerance, coping with crises without making things worse; emotion regulation, understanding and changing unwanted emotions; and interpersonal effectiveness, navigating relationships, asking for what you need, saying no effectively.
That sounds incredibly practical. Now, thinking more broadly about management, especially with Cluster A's distrust or Cluster B's potential for manipulation, is there a key principle that applies across the board?
I'd say consistency and firm boundaries are absolutely paramount. For example, with someone with paranoid PD, you must be reliable. Stick to schedules, follow through on promises exactly. Any perceived inconsistency can feed into their core fear of betrayal.
And with behaviors like manipulation or maybe staff splitting?
Team consistency is vital. Everyone needs to be on the same page. Clear communication within the treatment team, meticulous documentation, and maintaining those boundaries consistently are non-negotiable. It prevents manipulation and protects both the patient and the staff.
And what about for APD, where that fundamental lack of trust and empathy is so central? How do you even build a therapeutic relationship?
It's incredibly difficult. The relationship itself is often impaired by hostility or suspicion. So the focus has to be on very clear, direct communication, firm limit setting on behaviors, maintaining professional neutrality. The goals are often more about managing behavior and reducing harm than achieving deep insight or a personality overhaul. It's about long-term management.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together. We've journeyed through the roots, the different manifestations. What's the big takeaway?
I think it's understanding that these aren't just bad choices or someone being difficult. Personality disorders are deeply ingrained patterns of perceiving, feeling, and relating, often stemming from that interaction between biological vulnerability and difficult early environments, especially trauma.
And that rigidity, the fact that it feels like just who I am, the egocentric part, makes insight so hard to achieve.
Exactly. That's often the biggest hurdle to engagement and change.
So we've covered the brain science, the clusters A, B, and C, the specific challenges of BPD, APD, NPD, and the gold standard like DBT. For our final thought, let's connect the outward drama back to the inner experience.
Okay.
Thinking about that profound vulnerability we discussed, the chronic emptiness in BPD, or maybe the intense fear of inadequacy hidden behind the grandiosity in NPD. What does recognizing that underlying pain tell us? How should it maybe shift our perspective when we encounter those challenging behaviors, the hostility, the manipulation, the rigidity?
And building on that, knowing that vulnerability is there, Why is maintaining that consistent professional neutrality combined with deep self-awareness on our part so absolutely critical? What happens if we get pulled into the drama or react purely emotionally? It really forces us to think beyond judgment, doesn't it? Towards understanding the function of the behavior, even when it's harmful.